Well, welcome into this new little venture here, the Be Conscious podcast. We thank you so much for tuning in. We thank you so much for clicking on the Be Conscious tab on the KHTK app, or if you search this out on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. We appreciate you giving me this opportunity here where we're going to delve away from the stick to sports idea. We're going to delve away from box scores and mock drafts and trade acquisitions and trade proposals and all of that stuff, and we're going to focus more on social issues. There is a direct intersect here with this first episode of Be Conscious that we're doing, as we're going to be talking to Howard Bryant. He is the senior writer at ESPN and author of The Heritage, Black Athletes, A Divided America, and the Politics of Patriotism. It's a pretty timely topic. It feels like it's always going to be a timely topic, given the fact that the President of the United States continues to address the NFL as if it's some sort of more specifically, he addresses black athletes in the NFL as if he's solving some great foreign policy issue here. And this intersect doesn't appear to be going anywhere, because anytime a team wins a championship, there's going to be conversations about if they're going to the White House. The NBA finals aren't even complete, and both teams have already said, yeah, invite or not, we have no interest in going, so don't bother sending an invite. That's the climate of today's political landscape. It has a direct intersect into sports. And there will be times here in this Be Conscious podcast as we move along that there's not going to be any intersect with sports at all. But today there is, and it's going to be a fantastic conversation with Howard Bryant coming up here in just a few minutes. If you've ever listened to the Lowdown on Sports 1140 KHTK, you know we tend to veer off from the stick-to-sports idea. We've been very vocal about issues pertaining to the community of Sacramento, where the show originates from, and we've been very vocal about issues that just seem to plague this country. You know, whether it was Ferguson or what happened to the police officers being ambushed in Dallas. We've never shied away from talking about that. We've never shied away from allowing you to talk back at us. That's what this platform is. It's a platform devoted exclusively to those types of issues. And as I said, today's show has a direct intersect between sports and politics. And I really want to start with, a brief history. The book, The Heritage, that Howard Bryant wrote is absolutely fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. And there are things that I think people forget when it comes to the history of race, athletes protesting, and the fallout. Because, every year in Major League Baseball, we have Jackie Robinson Day. Everybody wears number 42, and Jackie Robinson is hailed as this hero, this groundbreaking hero for Major League Baseball. You know that Jackie Robinson never got a job in baseball after he retired. As a matter of fact, Jackie Robinson became much more radical after he retired. But he died relatively young, and for some reason he started to get looked at differently. Major League Baseball used him as the poster child for desegregation, despite the fact it didn't appear that they were particularly pleased with this idea back then. Another famous activist was Tommy Smith and John Carlos in the 1968 Olympics. They raised fists, black glove fists, black power. They were barefoot on the podium, which is something a lot of people ignore because they were protesting poverty. They wore beads to protest lynching. They wore buttons that supported the Olympic Project for Human Rights. Tommy Smith was 24 years old when that happened. He never did anything after that. He played 2 games with the Cincinnati Bengals as a wide receiver in 1969. That was it. He's known for that protest rather than what should have been a phenomenal track and field career. But before we get to Howard Bryant, I want to run back a couple of things for you, because we've referenced this so many times, and it just seems to have gotten lost over the course of history. And that's Colin Kaepernick. Kaepernick is the one who has brought, the most recent wave of athlete protest or athlete demonstrations back to the forefront. And it's amazing to me how many questions people ask now that he answered there that first day. Remember, Cap was sitting down for 3 games before anybody noticed, or for 2 games, they noticed on the third. And once he was questioned about why he was sitting, he seemed to answer all those questions pretty clearly.
I mean, ultimately, it's to bring awareness and make people, realize what's really going on in this country. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust, people aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change. That's something that, this country stands for freedom, liberty, justice for all, and it's not happening for all right now.
So he was pressed a little bit further. There on that first day of these demonstrations, he was pressed further about what needs to change.
There's a lot of things that need to change. One specifically is police brutality. There's people being murdered unjustly and not being held accountable. Cops are getting paid leave for killing people. That's not right. That's not right by anyone's standard.
So that seems to be pretty clear. But what about, and this is something that we've heard a lot, but what about the military? What about the flag?
I have great respect for men and women that have fought for this country. I have family, I have friends that have gone and fought for this country. And they fight for freedom. They fight for the people. They fight for liberty and justice for everyone. And that's not happening. I mean, people are dying in vain because this country isn't holding their end of the bargain up as far as, giving freedom and justice and liberty to everybody. It's something that's not happening. And I've seen videos, I've seen circumstances where men and women that have been in the military have come back and been treated unjustly by the country they fought for and have been murdered by the country they fought for on our land. That's not right.
Try to take yourself back to, 2016. Remember the name Alton Sterling, Philandro Castro, Paul O'Neill. Right here in Sacramento, you had Joseph Mann. Since then, you've had Stephon Clark. They were all murdered at the hands of police officers. With the exception of Stephon Clark, those were all back in 2016. Since then, you've had Terrence Kusher. You've had Keith Lamont Scott. You've had example after example after example of unjust murders at the hands of law enforcement. That, clearly stated by Colin Kaepernick on day one, is what he was demonstrating. It's what he was trying to bring awareness to. Now, there's plenty of tough guys on social media and sports pundits just the same. Guys like Doug Gottlieb, who determined because Colin Kaepernick had made so much money in his playing career, he can't talk about oppression. He tweeted, $61 million guaranteed. Very oppressed. Hashtag Colin Kaepernick. One problem with that, Doug Gottlieb. Let's go back again to that first day.
This stand wasn't for me. This stand wasn't because I feel like I'm being put down in any kind of way. This is because I'm seeing things happen to people that don't have a voice, people that don't have a platform to talk and have their voices heard and affect change. So I'm in a position where I can do that, and I'm going to do that for people that can't.
And everyone has come up with a various reason as to why Colin Kaepernick did this, and to, he opted out of his contract, so it's his own fault. He doesn't have a job. They don't want to believe he's blackballed. All of this different nonsense. Yet Cap knew back then in 2016 what this might mean for his career.
I think there's a lot of consequences that come along with this. There's a lot of people that don't want to have this conversation, that they're scared they might lose their job, or they might not get the endorsements. They might not be treated the same way. And those are things I'm prepared to handle, and those are things that other people might not be ready for. It's just a matter of where you're at in your life, where your mind's at. And at this point, I've been blessed to be able to get this far and have the privilege of being in the NFL and, making the kind of money I make and enjoy luxuries like that. But I can't look in the mirror and see other people dying on the street that should have the same opportunities that I've had and say, you know what, I can live with myself, because I can't if I just walk.
Let's bring in senior writer at ESPN and author of The Heritage, Black Athletes, A Divided America, and the Politics of Patriotism, Howard Bryant. Howard, thank you so much for being with us. We just ran back some of Colin Kaepernick's remarks, and it felt like his message from the beginning was very clearly stated. How did it get lost?
Well, I think the easiest answer is that I don't think anybody ever cared about the message. I don't think the message ever got lost. I don't think the message was ever received. I think the message that he sent was followed up by the mainstream media and the broadcast partners and the fans and everyone else concentrating on what they were more comfortable focusing on, which was the American flag, which was that conversation. That's what they wanted to talk about, and that's what they've been talking about for 2 years.
But this isn't new, right? Because when we go back to, Muhammad Ali, and you wrote about this obviously extensively in your new book, The Heritage, Ali was banned. It wasn't because black people shouldn't be fighting in the Vietnam War. It was because he was anti-American. The same thing was true with Tommy Smith and John Carlos. This isn't new for a message to get purposely muddled, is it?
No, it's not new at all. And none of that is new. And I think that because it's not new, you have to assess it in two ways. And these are two of the areas that I really try to focus on in the book, in The Heritage. Is the first is that because it's not new, you take the lineage between Paul Robeson and, say, Jackie Robinson and Muhammad and Curt Flood, and they all got destroyed. So you knew there was a price that was going to be paid, which tells you, if you know anything about history, if you pay any attention to the history, that this entire nonsensical argument that Kaepernick was not being punished is ahistorical, because they all get punished. The second thing that you realize, because it's not new, is that this is your generation. Depending on when you were born, depending on your time frame, you would determine whether or not you were surprised by this or whether you're not. If you were born in the 1990s or the late 80s or somewhere in that area, then the response of players taking a stand is new to you. And so it's hard for you to understand how ferociously the culture will punish you, because you're not used to these players getting involved in the first place.
I don't think I realized this until after I finished your book and I did a little more research on Tommy Smith. He was one of the fastest men in the world back in 1968, and he was 24 years old.
That's right.
That's just essentially, Tommy Smith was blackballed.
Oh, of course, Tommy Smith was blackballed, and John Carlos, in a way, was blackballed, and Curt Flood was blackballed, and Jackie Robinson was blackballed, and Paul Robeson was blackballed, and Muhammad Ali was blackballed. And that doesn't even include the people that we're not talking about. And so that doesn't even include the Syracuse 8 players that were blackballed. I mean, this is nothing new, and that's one of the points that I try to make when people talk about the rise of the black athlete speaking up and shut up and play and all of these different attitudes, is that there's a historical lineage here. That's why it's called a heritage. There is an inheritance here of black athletes being involved. And there's also a heritage as well of them being responded to very harshly by the public that wants to own them or that thinks it owns them.
Are we adding Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed's name to that list of blackball athletes?
So far we are. Absolutely we are, because they haven't played and they haven't been signed, and you can't say that they're not capable players. And I think that one of the things that the book really talks about, and one of the things that I try to emphasize, isn't that this is new or that this is happening or it's not happening or whatever. I don't think that's really important, because you can look with your own two eyes and see that. I'm not trying to change your mind. What I am trying to emphasize, however, is the conversation that we're having today through the Colin Kaepernick, Eric Reed lens is how comfortable we are as a public that corporations can simply deny you employment, that everyone seems to be okay with that we're not okay. We talk about second chances for people who commit crimes, but we're not okay talking about the notion of denying someone employment for not even breaking the law. And that's one of the things that had bothered me the most during this entire story, is that you would have people like Michael Vick and you would have people like Ray Lewis who would come out and give their advice and be given the microphone and be given the floor when they were both involved in felonious activity. And one did time in prison, and they have been allowed to essentially shape Colin Kaepernick, who did nothing close to breaking the law. It really does say a lot about who we are and where we are as a culture.
The new book is fantastic, The Heritage. You write extensively about Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali, and you've brought them up a couple of times in this conversation. And I'm fascinated as we look at Muhammad Ali now and we look at Jackie Robinson now, and even to a degree the way we look at Tommy Smith now and the way that those guys, and we can even put Martin Luther King in this conversation. The way we look at those guys now is so drastically different than the way that they were perceived back, in the 60s. Why do we reshape this narrative of what these athletes were then into the way we look at them now?
No, very easily, because they're dead. They're dead. They're harmless. And not only are they dead and not only are they harmless, but they were vindicated by history, and that they can be claimed by a generation that takes no responsibility for them. You don't have to take responsibility for Martin Luther King in your own eyes because you can say, well, I wasn't born during that time. You don't have to take responsibility for Jackie Robinson because you can say, I wasn't around for that. And you can do the same for Muhammad Ali because you can say the same. I wasn't around for that, even though your uncles and aunts and parents and grandparents wanted to see him under the jail. And then there's something else as well that you can do to make it very easy, and that is you knew how the story ended. So why wouldn't you be on Muhammad Ali's side today? Because he was right. So you're looking at 30 or 40 or 20 years from now. Do we look at Colin Kaepernick very differently? Sure, I'm very sure we will, because we respect courage as long as that courage isn't challenging us. The reason why Colin Kaepernick is such a dangerous person is because he's indicting you. He's not indicting your dead relatives or some lineage of slaveholders. He's indicting you, the public, living right now. And that includes your aunts and uncles and brothers and friends who happen to be police officers. And he's not wavering from that, and he's not trying to make you feel comfortable. And that makes him a threat, no different than the threat that Ali and MLK and Malcolm X and those guys were in real time back then.
Why is criticizing police officers or the way policing is done in this country, why does that feel like it's so taboo, like it's so not allowed? I don't think I've ever heard Donald Trump address the actual issue that these demonstrations are taking place for. I don't even know that I've heard an NFL owner reference what these are taking place for.
Well, why would they? It's not their area. They don't have an interest in it. They are part of the power. They view the police very differently than people in black communities view the police, because the police are their neighbors and friends and colleagues and relatives in so many different ways. And on top of that, you have to have this conversation. Well, you can't have this conversation without talking about 9/11. You can't discuss it without putting everything in the framework of 9/11. Like, as I said in many, many different interviews, when I was a kid, the things that we feared were based in one thing, and that was the Cold War. That's what we were afraid of. Today it's terrorism, and 9/11 is the dynamic moment for anybody, I think, born, say, after 1984 or 1985, where if you were born in 1990, you were 10, 11 years old on 9/11. And so everything about sports has been sold and managed and packaged and commercialized through that horrible day. And the biggest thing that took place from that day was the conflation of military and police. Police became heroes. And you could not challenge that. and you weren't going to challenge it then. You certainly don't challenge it now, even though the relationship between the black community and the police has always been fraught with peril. It's always been difficult. But the challenge, the collision that you have here is the way the general public views what's taken place against how people in the black community view it. They're not the same thing.
It's fascinating, for people who actually look back at history and realize that, you can look back at the Watts riots in the 60s, and you can look back to the Los Angeles riots in the 90s, and so many riots that happen in these major cities are based off of the interaction, or the match that started the whole thing was an interaction between the black community and police officers.
That's 100% right, and that's the battle, and that's been the historical battle between the African American community and law enforcement. But once again, I think that there's another thing here worth discussing too, and that is your media. Once again, this entire discussion, this entire conversation, whether we're talking about Colin Kaepernick, whether we're talking about LeBron James, whether we're talking about the Players Coalition or Malcolm Jenkins or any of these players involved, the conversation has been written through the lens. It's been written through the lens and been told through the lens of the flag. And why is that? It is because that is the lens that makes the powerful comfortable. So they are dealing with this entire story based on the reaction to the protest. That's the lens they know. That's the lens they're comfortable with. That's the lens that allows them not to ask any questions. That's one of the things in this book that I talk so much about, is who gets to control the lens. And as long as that's the case, then media doesn't have to send the message of what the protest is about to the public. They're not doing their jobs when they do that, but they're writing it through the lens of what makes them understand this story. And you don't have to ask questions when you think you already know it.
Howard, you mentioned Malcolm Jenkins. I don't know what to think about him right now. Does Malcolm Jenkins have a place in the heritage?
I'm not sure. I think time is going to determine that. And the reason why I say that is because I'm very conflicted by Malcolm Jenkins myself. I have two issues with Malcolm Jenkins, or two questions. One, there's no question whatsoever that he is committed to seeing some change in the condition of black people. There's no doubt about that. I don't love the fact, I don't even like the fact that people call him an Uncle Tom. I don't think Malcolm Jenkins is an Uncle Tom. I think Malcolm Jenkins views this issue in one way when you have to view it in two ways. And the way he views it is strictly through the idea of legislative reform, through legislative reform and through institutional reform. And I just don't think you can do that. I think you have to have both. I think that you have to have people in the street, because nothing changes without people in the street. And I think there's a naivete on Malcolm Jenkins' part, thinking that you can create all this change throughout the system without any sort of protest and without having people make their voices heard. And the reason why I say naivete is because he's taken the position. What do you think? He's the first, you think you're the first guy that's actually tried to have police reform? People don't respond without pressure. And I think that that's the biggest mistake that he makes. Whenever I see him and the McCourty brothers and the members of this Players Coalition, when I see them out there talking about, well, you got to do more than take a knee. No, you need both. And they seem to diminish the importance of protest, which is also ahistorical, which is also something that undermines movements. And I think the point that I was trying to make in the Heritage as well, and one of the many points that's in that book, but at the end, when we start talking about Malcolm Jenkins and the Players Coalition, is by doing what they did, by diminishing the importance of protest, they split their own ranks.
Yeah.
And by splitting the ranks, they sold out Colin Kaepernick and they sold out Eric Reed, and they isolated those guys, making it really easy for the league to blackball them. And the other thing that they did by doing that was they made it really, really, really difficult for the players to stick together on any issue. They split their ranks. You can't do that. You got to have solidarity.
Yeah, I should make it clear, too, as I asked you what Malcolm Jenkins' place in the heritage is. The heritage isn't just the title of your book. It has a very specific meaning. Can you explain to us what that is?
Well, to me, I think what that meaning is, and from listening to the people who use that term, it's the people who were willing to take a risk in order to lead. It's the people who are in those positions of influence, those athletes who were willing to risk their comfort and willing to risk their stature. And when you bring up someone like Malcolm Jenkins, who's willing to work within the system, who went out of his way to talk about not protesting in a way that upset the owners, and let's be honest, I know he has disagreed with this, but I disagree with him on this. There is a difference between raising your fist during the national anthem and taking a knee. Taking a knee is the gesture that they respond to. That's the gesture. So even though Malcolm raised his fist, it's not equivalent to taking a knee. The same is true for when LeBron James talks. He can criticize Donald Trump, and he can say that and he can get away with that, but it's not the same gesture as taking a knee. That is the gesture that begins a totally different conversation. And so I think the real issue when you're talking about someone like him is when these chapters are written and we look back at Malcolm Jenkins' career, did he undermine the heritage or did he join it? I think as of right now, based on how the Players Coalition has fractured and that they didn't stand with Colin Kaepernick and that they so far they've taken the owner's money and they've allowed two of their players who are two of their most prominent players on this issue, to essentially be blackballed. Right now, you have to say he's not part of it.
Yeah. Given Donald Trump's obsession with the NFL and the NFL's owners' apparent obsession with Donald Trump, especially given this recent stuff with the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, do you think these demonstrations will continue?
Well, I think it's going to come down to what the players choose to do with their union. I think if the players weren't out there protesting in the first place. They really didn't do a whole lot outside of Kaepernick and Eric Reed. They were negotiating much more. So why would we think that they would fight harder now? Maybe they're insulted. They were insulted in September when Donald Trump called them SOBs, and
right.
they came together for all of 2 weeks. So yeah. I don't know how much more we can ask or expect of them. But I think that it is going to come down to something else, and that is, do they get with their union and do they say, listen, we are now mobilized, we're in this, we need you to back us against an outside force, and are they going to try to force ownership to say, listen, we have more in common than we have apart, or are they going to, in a way, become radicalized? I would believe that when I see it, especially because you've got two concurrent collusion lawsuits going on with Kaepernick and Reed. So if this doesn't motivate the players to come together, then I don't think anything will. You made a $90 million agreement to partner on social justice. You were supposedly, this issue went to, you put it to bed, and then the owners essentially double-cross you by coming up with an Anthem policy, and then they caved to Donald Trump, who has been questioning your citizenship and questioning your patriotism since he got into office. So if this doesn't motivate you, on top of having two of your players be denied employment, I don't think anything's going to motivate these guys.
Before we let you go, and this is off the topic of the NFL stuff, how close were we to, and you did write about this in the Heritage, but I got the feeling as I was reading what you were writing, that maybe you held, that you might actually know more about this situation than you let on in your book, and it's the potential NBA shutdown during the Donald Sterling situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, once again, when you talk about power, and I think we'll have this conversation as the years go on about LeBron James, I believe that LeBron James's real endgame is to topple the entire power structure of professional sports. I think that what LeBron James really wants is to have players choose their commissioners, to have players have percentages of ownership on the teams they play on. I think that's really what he wants to do. And that being the case, when you talk to someone like Carmelo Anthony and you talk to some of the players, it's really interesting when you look and you say, did the players have an opportunity to shut the game down? And what would have happened had they done that during the playoffs? Or did they get what they needed to get by getting Donald Sterling out of there, by having Adam Silver listen to them? There are NBA players out there that to this day, and Carmelo's one of them, who still believes that the players, if they really wanted to send the message that, hey, this is our game and you don't mess with us, that they shouldn't have compromised with Adam Silver. They should have shut the game down in the playoffs, and then you'd have to listen to him.
Can a black athlete ever be just an athlete?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And if so, that day isn't here yet. And that's one of the big questions. I mean, I make the argument in the book that the black athlete in America is the most influential, the most important, and the most visible black employee in the history of this country. They're the ones with the money. They're the ones who integrated the country. And because of that, it comes with a responsibility. And the only way that responsibility goes away is when there are other occupations with other people who replace it, where the athlete doesn't become that important to us, where we have doctors and lawyers and senators and all of those different things. At 13% of the population, can that take place? I don't know. But right now, when you look at who has the money, who has the influence, who do we listen to, right now it's ball players. And that's why we judge them when they show up, like LeBron James did, or when they didn't, like Michael Jordan did not.
I can't recommend this book enough to everybody out there. You mentioned 9/11 changing sports. You write about that extensively. It's incredibly compelling. You wrote about an ill-fated meeting with black Major League Baseball players that actually comes across almost as comical given the state of Major League Baseball. But it's a fantastic book, The Heritage, Black Athletes, A Divided America, and the Politics of Patriotism. Howard, can't thank you enough for your time today. You've been very generous. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad it worked out.
Senior writer at ESPN and author of The Heritage, a number of other books. So that kind of brings up the question now is, how is this all going to end? You know, and that's kind of what we were talking about there with Howard. If history is any indication, and as we talked about with Muhammad Ali, it's going to be rewritten. Like, America's going to decide what story gets told. Like, Muhammad Ali was he refused induction into the draft. He was the most hated man in all of America. Well, he's revered now. He's loved now. Tommy Smith and John Carlos are looked at totally different than they used to be. You know, I mentioned Martin Luther King to Howard, and Martin Luther King was the same guy who got a letter that was later attributed to the FBI that read, "King, there's only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have just 34 days. There is but one way for you out. You better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is bared to the nation." That was essentially the FBI telling Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself. Yet every January, we celebrate Martin Luther King. We reshape history. Hell, I'll take you further back than that. I'll take you back to Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the guy who freed the slaves, right? He had such a love and admiration for equality. Really? Okay. Here's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. "I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races, that I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality." That was 5 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. But history is shaped differently because we know the outcome. And I don't think it's so much, Howard alluded to, well, it's easy to beloved them now because they're dead. I think, and there's something true to that, because I think Muhammad Ali started becoming more beloved once he lost his voice. Once that big, brash sound who used to call his rounds and call his fights, once that voice started to diminish due to sickness, well, he became a sympathetic figure. And once America realized what Muhammad Ali realized from the beginning, is that we had no business over in Vietnam. And everyone's perception of the war started to change. then everyone's perception of Muhammad Ali changed. It's fascinating. Muhammad Ali wanted change. Tommy Smith, John Carlos, they wanted change. Jackie Robinson wanted change. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted change. I can only think of one black guy in American history who pushed for change and people listened. I don't know how much change he was able to implement, but when his rallying cry became change and hope, a portion of America responded and elected that man as a two-term president of the United States. I think it's clear a lot of people resented that. I mean, a lot of people are uncomfortable with change, especially decision makers, elected officials. Then you had an entire presidency being run on the premise of making America great again. Now, make America great again, wouldn't that imply that America isn't great, that it needs to be fixed to be made great again? And you walk around, you see people walking around with that red hat and those white letters. But a black athlete calling attention to police brutality or a singer calling into question border police tactics, somehow that's unpatriotic. That's anti-American. That's unacceptable. Why is that? Why? I said this after the Stephon Clark shooting here in Sacramento. Why is it unacceptable to ask for something to be better? Why can a portion of America rally around the cry of making America great again, while others can't say, well, why don't we just make the police force great? Can we focus on that? Can we get that better? Can we get the electoral system great again? Can we get that better? Can we get just little spots of America? Can we get those better? No, it's a taboo topic. You can't talk. It's like it's like asking the police to be better. That's almost like somehow it's like insulting the military or something. Like you're not allowed to do that. And I don't understand why, because pretending that policing doesn't need reform. And this isn't a black and white issue. This is a police issue. Black police officers respond badly to people just as easily as white police officers do. If you're a bad cop, you're a bad cop, and it doesn't matter what color you are. If you're an undertrained cop, you're an undertrained cop, and it doesn't matter what background you have. There shouldn't be anything wrong with asking for it to be better. Asking people or telling people or demanding people stick to sports, stick to singing, stick to acting, stick to whatever it is you do. That's implying that politicians let the politicians handle the politics and the betterment of America. Except the president was a reality show host and a casino owner. I have to take him seriously. How come no one said to him, hey, man, stick to hosting bad reality shows? Hey, man, stick to bankrupting casinos. How come no one said that to him? He's not a lifelong politician. It's an obvious and uncomfortable double standard. It's okay for Donald to say what he wants, to do what he wants, claim America isn't great so we can fix it. But it's not okay for anyone else to say, hey, let's fix this. Let's make it better. I don't know where these player protests are going. I could tell you where they've been. You know, that Black Power salute that we've referenced here a few times in the Mexico City Olympics in 1968. I know what that led to. It led to the same thing as Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf when he refused to stand for the national anthem in the NBA in 1996. Led to nothing. Did you know that Lew Alcindor, who later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, did you know that he refused to stand for the national anthem at UCLA? You know what UCLA did to combat that? They started playing the national anthem before players left the locker room. In 1972, in the Summer Olympics there, Vincent Matthews and Wayne Collett, they refused to stand at attention for the national anthem. They came in first and second. They were barred from the 4x400 meter relay. So it goes back to that question we keep asking with player demonstrations, with kneeling for the national anthem, with raising a fist, with the Players Coalition, with all that different stuff. How is this going to end? What's going to be the result of this? And the answer is nothing. Like, we're not going to get anything out of this. At least history has shown we're not going to get anything out of this. We're just going to get more division. You look at this NFL rule. The NFL has decided all players on the field will stand for the national anthem or face discipline for their team and ultimately Roger Goodell. Okay, players have the option to stay in the locker room for the anthem. Okay, so now when the anthem is finished, all eyes will turn to the locker room to see who comes running out. And it's already gotten this, that rule has already gotten a political reaction from people within politics. A New York representative, Peter King, not to be confused with Monday morning quarterback Peter King, he complained about the Jets CEO, Christopher Johnson, his decision to foot the bill of any fines imposed on players who protest in violation of the new rule. He was angry about it. Minnesota Representative Keith Ellison has declared that he will ignore the NFL for the opposite reason, because they've stifled the players' right to protest. There's no winner in any of this. The Players Coalition is a joke. The NFL owners are a joke. They're in bed. They're worried. And Donald Trump is going to run a re-election campaign off the back of the NFL and athlete demonstrations. The only thing new about the divisiveness of this subject as compared to the 60s is social media. Everyone has an opinion, and the opinions are more extreme because a large majority of these keyboard warriors, they wouldn't share their opinion from outside the protection of their phony profile picture and made-up Twitter handle. Protest and political statements have been a staple for black athletes for as far as you're willing to go back. And LeBron James carries a burden that Tom Brady can never fathom. Serena Williams carries the weight of being a black woman in a white sport. I mean, she's black, she's a woman, and she's in a white sport. Those are burdens. You think anyone would ask Maria Sharapova if she's intimidated by Serena Williams' looks? No, of course not. But that's the climate of that sport. That's the climate of sports. That's the climate of being black. That's the climate of being a black woman. It feels like 2016 may have been the start of like a second civil rights movement. Because these demonstrations, they're not going anywhere. The roads of sports and politics, they're going to continue to intersect. And sadly, I expect the divide in this country to only become greater. Until more people are willing to stop, listen, walk away from their rehearsed talking points and divisive language, which is really difficult to do when the leader of the free world epitomizes everything I just said right there. It's not going to happen. The regression of progression will only continue. I appreciate you tuning into this first episode of Be Conscious. We're just getting started. We have a lot of wonderful things planned over the coming weeks. Be sure to check out The Lowdown every Monday through Friday on Sports 1140 AM in Northern California. Or if you're listening to this podcast on the KHTK app, you can listen live 12 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can even search The Lowdown in a podcast platform if that's where you found this Be Conscious episode. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you wouldn't mind, if you enjoyed it, hit the 5-star review as well. And if you really liked it, refer it to some friends, share it on social media, do all of that stuff. Want to thank Howard Bryant for being with us here today on this inaugural episode. And if you have any feedback, good or bad, shoot it to me. D. Barling, that's Barling, at saclocalmedia.com. Remember, you can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has freedom. That's Malcolm X. I'm Damien Barling. See you next Thursday.